7 Wives and 7 Prisons or Experiences in the Life of a Matrimonial Maniac. A True Story. Written by himself. By L. A. Abbott, New York, published for the author. 1870 Contents. Detailed contents. 7 Wives and 7 Prisons. Chapter I. The First and Worst Wife. Chapter 2. Marriage Miseries from My Second. Chapter 3. The Skimmer Sensation. Chapter 4. Success with Sarah. Chapter V. Suffer How the Shamers Made Me. Chapter 6. Free Life and Fishing. Chapter 7. Wedding a Widow, and the Consequences. Chapter 7. On the Keen Scent. Chapter 9. Marrying 2 Milliners. Chapter X. Prison Life in Vermont. Chapter 11. On the Tramp. Chapter 12. Attempt to Kidnap Sarah Skimmer's Boy. Chapter 13. Another Widow. Chapter 14. My Own Son Tries to Murder Me. Chapter 15. A True Wife and Home, at last. Detailed contents. Chapter 1. The First and Worst Wife. My Early History. The First Marriage. Leaving Home to Prospect. Sending for My Wife. Her Mysterious Journey. Where I Found Her. $10 for Nothing. A Fascinating Hotel Clerk. My Wife's Confession. From Bad to Worse. Final Separation. Trial for Forgery. A Private Marriage. Summary Separation. Chapter 2. Miseries from My Second Marriage. Lovemaking in Massachusetts. Arrest for bigamy. Trial at Northampton. A stunning sentence. Sent to state prison. Learning the brush business. Sharpening picks. Prison fare. In the hospital. Kind treatment. Successful horseshoeing. The warden my friend. Efforts for my release. A full pardon. Chapter 3. The Skimmer Sensation. The Skimmer Family. In Love with Sarah. Attempt to elope. How it was prevented. Second attempt. A midnight expedition. The alarm. A frightful beating. Escape, flogging the devil out of Sarah. Return to New Jersey. Boston Yankee. Plans to secure Sarah. Chapter 4. Success with Sarah. Mary Smith as a Confederate. The plot. Waiting in the woods. The spy outwitted. Sarah secured. The pursuers baffled. Night on the road. Efforts to get married. The old offender. Married at last. A constable after Sarah. He gives it up. An ale orgy. Return to Boston Yankees. A home in Goshen. Chapter V. How the Shamers Made Me Suffer. Return to Skimers. Peace, and then pandemonium. Frightful family row. Running for refuge. The gang again. Arrest at midnight. Struggle with my captors. In jail once more. Put in irons. A horrible prison. Breaking out. The dungeon. Sarah's baby. Curious compromises. Old Skimmer my jailer. Signing a bond. Free again. Last words from Sarah. Chapter 6. Free Life and Fishing. Taking care of crazy men. Carrying off a boy. Arrested for stealing my own horse and buggy. Fishing in Lake Winnipesaukee. An odd landlord. A woman as big as a hogshead. Reducing the hogshead to a barrel. Wonderful verification of a dream. Successful medical practice. A busy winter in New Hampshire. Blandishments of Captain Brown. I go to Newark, New Jersey. Chapter 7. Wedding a Widow and the Consequences. I marry a widow. 6 weeks of happiness. Confiding a secret, and the consequences. The widow's brother. Sudden flight from Newark. In Hartford, Con. My wife's sister betrays me. Trial for bigamy. Sentenced to 10 years imprisonment. I become a bobbin boy. A good friend. Governor Price visits me in prison. He pardons me. 10 years sentence fulfilled in 7 months. Chapter 8. On the keen scent. Good resolutions. Enjoying freedom. Going after a crazy man. The old tempter in a new form. Mary Gordon. My new cousin. Engaged again. Visit to the old folks at home. Another marriage. Starting for Ohio. Change of plans. Domestic quarrels. Unpleasant stories about Mary. Bound over to keep the peace. Another arrest for bigamy. A sudden flight. Secreted 3 weeks in a farmhouse. Recaptured at Concord. Escaped once more. Traveling on the Underground Railroad. In Canada. Chapter 9. Marrying 2 milliners. Back in Vermont. Fresh temptations. Margaret Bradley. Wine and women. A mock marriage in Troy. The false certificate. Medicine and millinery. Eliza Guernsey. A spree at Saratoga. Marrying another milliner. Again arrested for bigamy. In jail 11 months. A tedious trial. Found guilty. Appeal to Supreme Court. Trying to break out of jail. A governor's promise. Second trial. Sentenced to 3 years imprisonment. Chapter X Prison life in Vermont. Entering prison. The scythe-snath business. Blistered hands. I learn nothing. Threatened to kill the shopkeeper. Locksmithing. Open rebellion. 6 weeks in the dungeon. Escape of a prisoner. In the dungeon again. The Madman Hall. He attempts to murder the deputy. I save Maury's life. Howling in the black hole. Taking off Hall's irons. A ghastly spectacle. A prison funeral. I am let alone. The full term of my imprisonment. Chapter 11. On the tramp. The day of my deliverance. Out of clothes. Sharing with a beggar. A good friend. Tramping through the snow. Weary walks. Trusting to luck. Comfort at Concord. At Meredith Bridge. The Blaisdells. Last of the Blossom business. Making money at Portsmouth. Revisiting Windsor. An astonished warden. Making friends of enemies. Inspecting the prison. Going to Port Jervis. Chapter 12. Attempt to kidnap Sarah Scheimer's boy. Starting to see Sarah. The long separation. What I learned about her. Her drunken husband. Change of plan. A suddenly formed scheme. I find Sarah's son. The first interview. Resolve to kidnap the boy. Remonstrance of my son Henry. The attempt. A desperate struggle. The rescue. Arrest of Henry. My flight into Pennsylvania. Sending assistance to my son. Return to Port Jervis. Bailing Henry. His return to Belvedere. He is bound over to be tried for kidnapping. My folly. Chapter 13. Another widow. Waiting for the verdict. My son sent to state prison. What Sarah would have done. Interview with my first wife. Help for Henry. The Biddeford widow. Her effort to marry me. Our visit to Boston. A warning. A generous gift. Henry pardoned. Close of the Scheimer account. Visit to Ontario County. My rich cousins. What might have been. My birthplace revisited. Chapter 14. My son tries to murder me. Settling down in Maine. Henry's health. Tour through the South. Secession times. December in New Orleans. Up the Mississippi. Leaving Henry in Massachusetts. Back in Maine again. Return to Boston, profitable horse trading. Plenty of money. My first wife's children. How they have been brought up. A barefaced robbery. Attempt to blackmail me. My son tries to rob and kill me. My rescue last of the young man. Chapter 15. A true wife and home at last. Where were all my wives? Sense of security. An imprudent acquaintance. Moving from Maine. My property in Rensselaer County. How I lived. Selling a recipe. About buying a carpet. 19 lawsuits. Sudden departure for the West. A vagabond life for 2 years. Life in California. Return to the East. Divorce from any first wife. A genuine marriage. My farm. Home at last. 7 Wives and 7 Prisons. Chapter I. The first and worst wife. My early history. The first marriage. Leaving home to prospect. Sending for my wife. Her mysterious journey where I found her. $10 for nothing. A fascinating hotel clerk. My wife's confession from bad to worse. Final separation. Trial for forgery. A private marriage. Summary. Separation. Someone has said that if any man would faithfully write his autobiography, giving truly his own history and experiences, the ills and joys, the haps and mishaps that had fallen to his lot, he could not fail to make an interesting story, and Disraeli makes Sidonia say that there is romance in every life. How much romance, as well as sad reality, there is in the life of a man who, among other experiences, has married 7 wives, and has been 7 times in prison solely on account of the 7 wives, may be learned from the pages that follow. I was born in the town of Chatham, Columbia County, New York, in September, 1813. My father was a New Englander, who married 3 times, and I was the eldest son of his 3rd wife, a woman of Dutch descent, or, as she would have boasted if she had been rich, one of the old Knickerbockers of New York. My parents were simply honest, hard-working, worthy people, who earned a good livelihood, brought up their children to work, behaved themselves, and were respected by their neighbors. They had a homestead and a small farm of 30 acres, and on the place was a blacksmith shop in which my father worked daily, shoeing horses and cattle for farmers and others who came to the shop from miles around. There were 3 young boys of us at home, and we had a chance to go to school in the winter, while during the summer we worked on the little farm and did the chores about the house and barn. But by the time I was 12 years old I began to blow and strike in the blacksmith shop, and when I was 16 years old I could shoe horses well, and considered myself master of the trade. At the age of 18, I went into business with my father, and as I was now entitled to a share of the profits, I married the daughter of a well-to-do neighboring farmer, and we began our new life in part of my father's house, setting up for ourselves, and doing our own housekeeping. I ought to have known then that marrying thus early in life, and especially marrying the woman I did, was about the most foolish thing I could do. I found it out afterwards, and was frequently and painfully reminded of it through many long years. But all seemed bright enough at the start. My wife was a good-looking woman of just my own age, her family was most respectable, 2 of her brothers subsequently became ministers of the gospel, and all the children had been carefully brought up. I was thought to have made a good match, but a few years developed that had wedded a most unworthy woman. 17 months after our marriage, our oldest child, Henry, was born. Meanwhile we had gone to Sydney, Delaware County, where my father opened a shop. I still continued in business with him, and during our stay at Sydney, my daughter, Elizabeth, was born. From Sydney, my father wanted to go to Bainbridge, Chenango County, NY, and I went with him, leaving my wife and the children at Sydney, while we prospected. As usual my father started a blacksmith shop, but I bought 100 acres of timber land, went to lumbering, and made money. We had a house about 4 miles from the village, I living with my father, and as soon as found out that we were doing well in business, I sent to Sydney for my wife and children. They were to come by stage, and were due, after passing through Bainbridge, at our house at 4 o'clock in the morning. We were up early to meet the stage, but when it arrived, the driver told us that my wife had stopped at the public house in Bainbridge. Wondering what this could mean, I at once set out with my brother and walked over to the village. It was daylight when we arrived, and knocked loudly at the public house door. After considerable delay, the clerk came to the door and let us in. He also asked us to take something, which we did. The clerk knew us well, and I inquired if my wife was in the house. He said she was, told us what room she was in, and we went upstairs and found her in bed with her children. Waking her, I asked her why she did not come home, in the stage. She replied that the clerk downstairs told her that the stage did not go beyond the house, and that she expected to walk over, as soon as it was daylight, or that possibly we might come for her. I declare, I was so young and unsophisticated that I suspected nothing, and blamed only the stupidity, as I supposed, of the clerk in telling her that the stage did not go beyond Bainbridge. My wife got up and dressed herself and the children, and then as it was broad daylight, after endeavoring, ineffectually, to get a conveyance, we started for home on foot, she leading the little boy, and I carrying the youngest child. We were not far on our way when she suddenly stopped, stooped down, and exclaimed, "Oh! See what I have found in the road." And she showed me a $10 bill. I was quite surprised, and verdantly enough, advised looking around for more money, which my wife, brother, and I industriously did for some minutes. It was full 4 weeks before I found out where that $10 bill came from. Meanwhile, my wife was received and was living in her new home, being treated with great kindness by all of us. It was evident, however, that she had something on her mind which troubled her, and one morning, about a month after her arrival, I found her in tears. I asked her what was the matter. She said that she had been deceiving me, that she did not pick up the $10 bill in the road, but that it was given to her by the clerk in the public house in Bainbridge, only, however, for this, he had grossly insulted her, she had resented it, and he had given her the money, partly as a reparation, and partly to prevent her from speaking of the insult to me or to others. But by this time my hitherto blinded eyes were opened, and I charged her with being false to me. She protested she had not been, but finally confessed that she had been too intimate with the clerk at the hotel. I began a suit at law against the clerk, but finally, on account of my wife's family and for the sake of my children, I stopped proceedings, the clerk paying the costs of the suit as far as it had gone, and giving me what I should probably have got from him in the way of damages. My wife too, was apparently so penitent, and I was so much infatuated with her, that I forgave her, and even consented to continue to live with her. But I removed to Greenville, Greene County, NY, where I went into the blacksmithing business, and was very successful. We lived here long enough to add 2 children to our little family, but as time went on, the woman became bad again, and displayed the worst depravity. I could no longer live with her, and we finally mutually agreed upon a lifelong separation, she insisting upon keeping the children, and going to Rochester, where she subsequently developed the full extent of her character. This, as nearly as I remember, was in the year 1838, and with this came a new trouble upon me. Just before the separation, I received from my brother's wife a note for $100, and sold it. It proved to be a forgery. I was temporarily in Troy, NY, when the discovery was made, and as I made no secret of my whereabouts at any time, I was followed to Troy, was there arrested, and after lying in jail at Albany one night, was taken next morning to Coxsackie, Greene County, and from thence to Catskill. After one day in jail there, I was brought before a justice and examined on the charge of uttering a forged note. There was a most exciting trial of 4 days' duration. I had 2 good lawyers who did their best to show that I did not know the note to be forged when I sold it, but the justice seemed determined to bind me over for trial, and he did so, putting me under $500 bonds. My half-sister at Sydney was sent for, came to Catskill, and became bail for me. I was released, and my lawyers advised me to leave, which I did at once, and went to Pittsfield, and from there to Worthington, Massachusetts, where I had another half-sister,